Okay, so today I'm going to show you how to create a font with Fontself. This is a plugin that's available for Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop, and I would recommend using it for Illustrator just because it's going to be better to create your characters as vectors, because then you'll be able to change the sizing of them as you want, and they're not going to have any loss of quality at all, whereas with Photoshop, if you change them quite a bit, then you may lose some quality. Okay, so I'm going to just select Window here. I'm going to click Extensions and then Fontself Maker. That's going to open the dialog window for Fontself. Sometimes this has a little bit of trouble loading. It looks like it's the case right now. So I'll just close it out there, open it back up again, and that should load now in a second. Okay, there we go, and we have one of the fonts that I've already created here. So I'm just going to hit the menu button in the top right, then I'm going to hit Font Template. And that's going to generate our template where we're going to create our font. Okay, so you can see here that on the top we have the basic Latin character set. We also have the advanced Latin character set. For the most part, you'll be able to stick to the basic set on the top here, unless you're going to be publishing in another language like the Romance languages, French and Italian, for example, because some of those accents will come in very useful. So I'm going to be actually, the reason I'm looking down here is because I'm doing this on my pen tablet. It's a XP Pen Innovator 16. I find it a lot easier to create fonts using this. And so I was just setting up some of the commands there, setting my scroll wheel to zoom. I also have my keyboard to the side. I will be showing a way that you can do this without using a pen tablet, that you can do it just with pen and paper a little bit later in the lesson. Okay, so one of the first things you're going to want to do is open up the Layers tab. You can see that there's a layer specifically for your artwork. All of the other layers are currently locked, so these are going to be your guides, which are the blue lines. You're also going to see the characters that are placed in the background that you can use for reference. All right, and you can turn those off if you prefer. Once you get the hang of this, I think usually that will be a good way to go, because it'd be less distracting for you when you're creating a font, especially if it's a font that's very different than these very plain letters here. Okay, but just for the purpose of this, I think we're actually going to keep those characters enabled. Okay, and we're going to want to start by setting up our brush. So I'm having a little bit of trouble to be able to use the brush right now. There's a little disabled icon, so I'm just going to spend a little bit of time to figure that out. One thing, it seems to work just fine with the mouse, but then with the pen tablet's giving me a little bit of trouble. So I have no idea why. Okay, so now I don't know exactly what I did, but it seems to be working just fine. So we're able to start drawing on our artboard here. So I'm using the typography workspace, and that gives us some options related to text and formatting. But I think in general, since we have the brush tool selected, and we can view all of these options. And first thing we want to do is go up on the top of our toolbar and select the brush. So we have a 3-point oval brush here. If we click the little menu icon, we can go to brush options, and that'll allow us to customize our brush. So we have a few different settings. We have the angle, the roundness, and the size here. Alright, so for the size, I want to set that up to be pressure sensitive, because I'm using a pressure sensitive pen tablet. And for this case, we're going to create a font that has a variable width. It's something a little bit more energetic and dynamic. Okay, I set the roundness to the tilt, but actually I think I want to set the angle to the tilt, and then I'm going to set the roundness is going to be fixed. So we'll select OK, and then we'll test out this brush. Okay, so here, if I apply to strokes, that's going to apply to all the existing brush strokes. If not, then I can select leave strokes to leave the existing strokes as they are. I'm going to hit apply to strokes. I'm going to hit OK, and we'll test out this brush. Okay. So I'm just going to try to vary the pressure here to see if we can get some variable lines. So here's a light pressure, here's a heavy pressure. They don't really seem to be different, so I'm going to check these brush settings once again. Okay, and then so under the size variation, it's set to 0, so that's the reason. So we can just select that to maximally 3 points. Okay, and we'll give that another try. Hit apply to strokes, and that'll apply to our existing strokes. That'll just take a second. Okay, now you can see that those previous strokes have now changed, so the light stroke is much thinner than the heavy pressure stroke. So let's try giving that a light stroke here and then a heavier one. Okay, now that looks great. So now we can start. This is a stroke there with a little bit of both, some light and heavy in the same stroke. So now we can start to design some of the characters. Okay, so I'm just going to make those characters visible again just for the sake of this tutorial. It's going to help to have those in the background. Okay, I'm trying to just make them less opaque here, so they're not as distracting, but I don't think I'm able to do that by varying the opacity there. That's more actually controlling the opacity of the brush, so I think the settings are somewhere else for that. But if I try to select all of the objects in that layer, okay, and then I vary that opacity. No, okay, still doesn't work. Okay, so those settings I think are somewhere else, so for now I'll just leave it as it is. Alright, so we start our stroke. So usually the tradition is that when you're making fonts like this with variable strokes, your upstroke is usually going to be applied with less pressure, and then the downstroke will be a heavier pressure, creating a thicker stroke. Okay, so I'm just experimenting here with the different line widths. So I'm going to try it with a 1 point. Okay, and that to me is it's just too thin. So I'll go back to the 3 points, but I'll just manage the line width using pressure. Okay, there we go. So upstroke is going to be a bit lighter, downstroke heavier. Okay. So I have to re-add in the variation settings there. Apply it to all strokes. Okay, here we are. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, too thin. So I'm just getting used to the pressure settings here. Okay, so there's my A. Okay, we've got our C. Heavy downstroke, lighter now. Okay, and we see here that we have this kind of part of our D is being cut off here. So the reason for that is actually when we're applying these strokes, there's also a fill color selected. You can see that in the left toolbar here. So if we just select none instead, we'll replace that that white with no fill. So we have black for our stroke and nothing for our fill. Now if we select all of these characters again, then we can select none for the fill, and that resolves the issue with the D. So now we can continue. All right, so thicker stroke for the downstroke, kind of a more medium for the horizontal. Okay, and that looks pretty good. Okay, so there are a couple other settings to be aware of. If you just double tap on the brush icon in your left toolbar, you'll see that there's this slider here under Fidelity where we can vary our smoothing. So we can, on the left side of the slider, we can have it very accurate, on the right side very smooth, and then we can also adjust this the number of pixels here. And so I believe that basically with a lower number under there, you'll be able to have rougher strokes. But you can also test out different types of strokes using this slider if you want to smooth out your strokes more. So I'm just going to leave it on the default settings. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so we'll continue. So I'm going to do a crossbar eye here instead. So So I'll do a horizontal stroke, then we've got the thicker vertical stroke, and the second horizontal. Same thing with the J. If you want to do a crossbar for the I, we should do one for the J. Okay. So I'll do a bit of a thicker one. Try to lighten up that stroke on the way up. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that one. So let's continue now. Okay, so let's pause and zoom in a little bit on the Y, and we'll talk about some of these guides and what they mean. So we have these guides in blue, and this is the cap height. This is the highest line. We also have the shoulder a little further down. This is where most of the lowercase letters are going to stop at the top end. Then we have the baseline at the bottom, which is also where most letters end at the bottom end. And finally, we have the descender. So this is where certain lowercase letters like the P and Q and Y will extend downward. Okay, there's our Y. Just a short stroke on the left and then a follow through on the right. We'll finish our uppercase alphabet with the Z. I like to add a horizontal line in the middle. It's just the way I was taught. So because this font is meant to be more of a handwritten style, I'm going to keep most of these things to the way that I would write on paper. Okay, so now we're going to get started with the lowercase letters. So a bit of a different style on the A as well, more of a handwritten style. You can always make sure that you vary it to fit your own style and what you're trying to achieve. For example, with this B here, the rounded part, I like it to land a little bit lower. And now I think that the variation in the line width is a little bit too much here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to adjust it. I think I'm going to keep the 3 points on the brush, but I'm going to change the variation. So I'm just going to drag that over to 2 points. Okay. And then I'll hit OK. And here I'm going to make sure that I hit apply to previous strokes. Otherwise I'd have to start everything all over again. And that'll automatically update the previous letters with the new settings. Okay, so so I'm just going to speed this part up while I go through the rest of the lowercase letters. Just another example here of how I'd probably like to vary from the suggestion. So I'd like the H to come a little bit lower from where the shoulder is there. Okay, so as you can see now, I'm turning off the characters in the background now because I'm starting to get used to where everything should sit, and the guides are helping a lot with that. So this can help to reduce the distraction and come up with some more original characters. So I'm going to speed up this section as well. I'm just going to finish the rest of the characters now that we finished both the uppercase and the lowercase letters. So we'll start in on the numbers here. And so the numbers are going to be sized very similar to capital letters. So they extend from the baseline up to the cap height, and that applies to all 9 digits. Okay, so if I wanted to do a more handwritten style of a 2, I'd do it like that, or we could do it more like so. Okay. Again, you can vary the style of the numbers as much as you'd like. For the 7, for example, I also like to do the horizontal bar there. It's just the way I was taught, so I do it that way. So I accidentally erased the 8, so I'll just add that back in. We got the 9, and then we're going to start into the other characters, so period and comma, etc. Okay, feel free to switch up the style of these as much as you'd like. Okay, so for example, I don't need these two to be symmetrical, these parentheses. I find that that really adds to the handwritten style, so I'll leave that like it is. I kind of like it. Same with the exclamation mark. I kind of like to draw that on a bit of a slant, so I'll do it that way. We got the question mark, put into quotations. I'm going to add simple, and for the ampersand I'm just going to do what I would do in a handwritten style. Okay, I don't know what these are called, but they're kind of like a squiggly bracket. So I'll put in the squiggly brackets. You don't need to do all of these symbols, especially if you don't think you're going to use them. But I would recommend you to do at least all of this basic character set, just because oftentimes you're going to want to use characters that you didn't think you were going to use. So these are the euro, the GBP, the British pounds, and the Chinese yuan symbols. Copyright reserved and TM symbols as well there. Okay, so now that we have all the characters completed, I'm going to remove some of the guides and the other characters, and I'm just going to leave only my characters remaining, and that's just going to help simplify things. Okay. So there is another way that you can complete this process. If you don't have a pen tablet, then you can actually do it by hand on a sheet of paper. And so the way that you do that is you just show all of these guides, and then you just print that out on a sheet of paper, and then just lay a blank sheet of printer paper over top of it, and then you can just draw directly over the guides with your own character. So this is an example of one that we had completed for a book called Chirp's Large Day, which is a kid's book about a puffin. And so essentially the person that created the font just drew directly over the guides their own characters. Okay. And then we scan that in onto the computer. So I'm just going to show you how that works right now. So we can create a new document. I'm actually, it doesn't really matter what size, but since it was scanned on a letter size, we'll choose letter. Okay, and we'll create our document. And now we prefer to have this in a landscape format, so we'll just edit the artboards. Okay, and then we'll just select that landscape orientation there. That's perfect, so it looks same orientation now that we have our file. We'll hit File, Place, go to where our file is located, and we'll place the file, and then we'll rotate it. If you hold the Shift key while you rotate, it'll go in 45-degree increments. Makes it much easier. Okay, and then we'll place that in the middle of our artboard here. So now we're going to do the image trace option. There are many different types, and you can experiment with which one produces the best result. But for now, we're going to use the line art option. Okay, it may take some time. We'll hit OK to continue. And that'll take a moment to process. Okay, so now we have vectors of all of our characters created. So there are a couple little issues here that you might notice. For example, the D is missing a line. So we can open up the image trace panel, and then we can just play around with some of these settings to get the effect that we want. So if we reduce this, then that should pick up more of the values on this threshold slider, and then that will fix some of the issues. Okay, so that'll process again once we release that. Okay, so I actually had the opposite effect, so we need to increase it. So we'll go up for around the 220 mark, let that process again, and then see how our characters look. Okay, that looks much better. I think we would still probably have a couple issues. I do see that the eye is missing a dot there. So you may have to go back over some of these characters and fix them, some of them. We're going to hit the expand button. So first, actually, so some of the times Adobe is going to create an image there with a white background. In this case, it didn't, so we don't have any white background, so that's great. But sometimes it will, and so we open up the image tracing panel. Yeah, so no white background there in this case. But if we do have a white background, we can hit the Ignore White. So you open up the image tracing panel, hit Advanced, and then Ignore White. And then that will remove any of the white that you have in that image trace. Okay, so now we're just going to hit the Expand button. And finally, right-click, and then we'll select Ungroup. As you can see here, everything is concluded into one object, basically, because all these characters are grouped together. But we hit Ungroup, and then now we can select the individual characters here. So we'll just copy this, bring it back over into our template, and we'll add a new layer here. Okay, now we're just pasting, and we can line it up here. You can see that this scans in a little bit bigger than the characters that we have below, but that's okay, because we have to consider that if these were drawn with the guides behind your sheet of blank paper, then generally speaking, then your characters should be sized correctly. there's no real reason to make it fit this template here. I would just reduce the size a little bit, but otherwise, like, you have all of your characters here, and you're just going to want to group the characters together so that you'll be able to import them and create your font from them. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our original font here. Just turning off all the layers again. Okay. Okay, so now we'll zoom in. We can see that some of these letters, they're made up of multiple strokes. The D, for example, here you have one for the curve, one for the straight line. And so if we were to upload these as they are and try to create our font, then software would get confused because we have multiple strokes here and it doesn't know, each one is its own object and it doesn't know which is meant to be the character. So we have to group all of these strokes to create a single object so that Fontself will understand which ones are supposed to be characters. So all you have to do is select the entire character and then Control G, so it's Control G or Command G, I guess, on a Mac, will group these letters together. And so we're just going to select all the letters, even if they seem like they might be just one stroke. Sometimes there are multiple strokes going in here. Select the U and the V, for example, that could be a multiple strokes. So just selecting every character one at a time, hitting Control G. And that way we ensure that we have one object for each character that we want to create a font from. So I'll just speed up some of this now. Okay, so now we have all of the strokes grouped together into separate characters. I'm just going to delete these two squiggles that I made at the beginning of the lesson here. Okay, clicking Window, going Extensions, opening up Fontself Maker. Okay, so since I have already a font open, we want to create a new one, so we hit New. So new style would be, say, if you wanted to add bold or italic, for example, but we want to create a brand new font, so we'll hit New Font. Okay, great. So now all we have to do is start dragging and dropping our characters into the Fontself window and to start creating our font. So first we select all the uppercase letters, and you can see that we have these nice predefined windows that we can drop our characters into. And so it's detected that we have selected 26 objects, and so that's why it's giving us those options to do uppercase alphabet or lowercase alphabet, and then below we have any character. If we had 10 objects selected, it would give us the option to add our numbers 0 to 9. So we're going to drag those into the uppercase and release. Okay, great. Same thing with the lowercase now. Select all of those 26 objects, drag them into lowercase alphabet and release. Okay, and that will create our lowercase alphabet. So all of those things are going to happen pretty much automatically, which is great. We're also going to do the same thing with our numbers. So we have 10 objects, 0 to 9 selected, so they will drag right into the 0 to 9 slot there. Okay, and those are set up automatically as well. But now we get into the additional characters, which are a little bit more tricky. We're going to have to define those one at a time. So we import those anyway and hit Import Anyway. And we'll be able to fix any of the issues that might happen with these glyphs throughout the process here. Okay, so import anyway. So now we're going to have to define these. So that's a period, so we just enter period in the box below. We have our comma, our colon, semicolon, exclamation mark, question mark. So again, we're just entering these characters in here. This is our single quote and double quote. Okay, and so for some characters, they kind of depend on context. So left quote is going to depend on where it comes compared to text. If it comes on the left side of the text, it'll automatically show us a left quote. If it comes on the right side, it'll show us a right quote. So we need to enter in what's called a ligature. So it's a longer, you can think of it like a bit of a code that's going to define what these symbols are for the system. So in the case of the left quote, we actually just write out quote left. For the right quote, we write out and we hit standard here when it gives us an option for what kind of ligature we want to create. So we're just going to select standard for everything. For the single right quote, it's quote right. Okay, for the double left quote, it's going to be quoted B left. I don't know why it's like that, but that's how it is. So if we enter in quoted B left, and you can zoom in there, go just rewind and zoom in there if you want to check out how that's written. So, and the same thing with the double quote on the right was quoted B right. And we just finish off some of these final symbols here. This is my version of an ampersand, so I'll just put in the ampersand symbol. Finally, the number symbol. Okay, so that's it. So we have our first bunch of special characters, and we're going to drag in the last row of our font. And we're going to have to define these symbols as well. So obviously we have our percentage symbol and our asterisks. So those look good. Our plus sign, our minus. This is going to be a multiplication sign here. So since we already have an X and we already have an asterisk, one of those two things would be able to solve that for us. So we'll just delete this glyph. We don't need an extra X or a multiplication symbol in this font. Same with the division symbol. Unless I think for some reason I'm going to be writing out mathematical equations, I might want to use them, but most of the time the slash would serve the same purpose for me, so I'm just going to delete that one. Okay, and then we'll finish up the equals, the tilde, left and right brackets here, forward slash, backslash, left parenthesis, and the right parenthesis. I don't know what you call this one, but we'll put that in there as well. We have our square brackets, $sign, our cent symbol. Okay, and then here with certain symbols, they're a little bit tricky to make on your keyboard. There are some codes, like for example, I believe the euro, this is the euro symbol. If you hold down Alt and type in 0128, then they'll produce the euro symbol. But the best way to do this is actually just to look up the symbol on Google and just copy paste it into this box. And we can do the same thing for all of our other special symbols. So the reserved symbol, find that on Google, copy and paste that into the box. With the TM symbol as well, you don't want to copy just the letters TM. You want to make sure that you copy the symbol itself, and then you can paste that in this box. So I think you get the idea here. I'm just going one at a time, back and forth from Google, researching these symbols and just copying them and pasting them into these boxes for their corresponding characters. So here I'm not exactly sure what this kind of C shape is here from, so I'm going to delete it. I think it probably came from the Euro symbol where software just got a bit confused. There might have been multiple strokes there, so not a problem. Just going to delete that one. And then I'll finally paste in the cent symbol, and then we're done. So we have all of our glyphs inserted. Okay, now we can get a bit of a preview as to how the font is going to look here in this window and the spacing and everything like that. So far it looks pretty good, but I'm going to use this feature and hit the smart button. It's going to smart space and kern our font. So basically it'll optimally set it up so that we have good spacing between each character. Let's optimize the look of the font. So there we go. You just saved 12 hours and 2 minutes of hard work. So they're estimating how much time it would take to manually just adjust each of these characters. And so that was a huge time savings. And the font is looking pretty good. If you needed to adjust any of the characters in the font, all you have to do is go in this window and just select one and try to drag it down, as you can see there with this P. So I could drag that down if I want to. It gives me a little warning error because it's not in the where it's expected, so I can just drag that back up. At any time I can just smart space and kern again, and that'll fix up all the spacing of the font. So there we go. We have our font created. So now we're just going to hit save. We'll give it whatever name we'd like. I'm going to call it BPP regular. That stands for Black Panel Press. I'll hit OK, and I'll just save it somewhere on my desktop. Usually I try to keep this in the same file folder with your images, say for your comic or graphic novel, because also in the cloud is usually better than just on your computer, say in Dropbox or Google Drive, because that'll ensure in the future that you don't have any issues with your files when you're trying to set up your comic. So it gives us this little preview while the quick smart metrics jump over to Lazy Designer, so we can see how the font looks when it's written out. Okay, so then if we wanted to as well, we could create a bold version of this font. So I'm just going to select all of this font, and I'm going to select 3 points stroke. So you can see that looks really too thick. A lot of the letters become illegible, so I'm going to try out a 2-point font instead and have a look. That looks much better to me. Sometimes you can have some issues like the dot of the I and the stem can connect when you increase the stroke, so look out for those kind of issues. Some of the special characters don't look so good, especially these quotes, so I'm going to put in a stroke weight of 1.5 instead, see if that looks better. I think that looks good enough for my purposes here. Same with these other characters. The @ symbol was kind of the part of the A was touching the swirl. Same with the number sign. Some of these strokes are touching where we don't want them to. It makes them a bit harder to read. So instead, actually, I'm going to just select all of these special characters, and I'm going to put in 1.5 stroke weight instead. Okay, so now we have the exact same font, just with a heavier stroke weight, and will allow us to create a bold font. So that's pretty cool. And now we're going to set up a new font just like we did before. We're going to hit new. Instead of new font this time, we'll hit new style. And then we can define the type of style. In this case, it is bold, but we can also do italic. Or you can select other and set your own name. for your font. Sometimes it could be named Slim, for example. I've seen fonts with those kind of styles. So there we go. We're ready to start the process again. So drag in the uppercase letters. Okay. Drag in the lowercase letters. There we are. We'll do the numbers. And our first row of characters. And then I'm just going to drag in the rest of the characters at the same time before I designate them. Okay. By now it should be familiar. We're going to have to go through and designate all of these characters. So this part I'll speed up a little bit. And there we go. We've now created our bold version of our font. We've completed the entire process, and so everything is ready to go in Fontself. So what I'm going to do now is just save the font so we can give that another name. So I've kind of misnamed this font because I named it BPP Regular. That's going to be the font family name. So I'm actually going to just change that, hit the font info button, change that instead to, I think I'll just call that Black Panel Press. Okay, I just noticed I left the K, so Black Panel Press, that'll be the font name. Okay, now we can hit save, and then we've got the font name Black Panel Press Bold. So we'll just save that wherever we'd like to store it. And there we go. We've got the regular and the bold version of the font. We're also going to want to save this Adobe Illustrator file somewhere, because then that way we can edit our glyphs and edit our font at a later point. So mine is giving me some difficulty, so I'll just skip through this part and get on to the next section. So we'll just also want to save this Adobe Illustrator file for future reference. And what we can do, if you'd like, you can copy this whole character set, paste it anywhere, even outside the artboard, that's fine. And then I'll just put back to 1 point. So this is the original font that we had created at 1 point, and then we've got the bold one down below. Here's another very cool thing that you can do if you want to create an italic version of your font. Just select all of your characters here in this grouping. I'll actually copy and paste those again. So then I'll have my 3 sets of fonts in the one document. Okay. Then we're going to go up, actually I think you can right click, yeah. So you can either go Object, Transform, and then Shear, or you can simply right click, Transform, and then Shear. Okay, and we're just going to drag this up until we get an angle that we like. I'm going to try 20%, 20 degrees, sorry. Okay, and then I'm going to, and we have a preview option here, so I'm going to hit, I think I like that as it is. I might go a little bit more severe just for demonstration purposes here. But, okay, so 25 degrees, okay. We hit OK. There we have all of our characters are sheared, so now what we can do is repeat the entire process We'll open up Fontself. We're going to hit New Style, and we'll select Italic. Hit OK. And then we would just repeat the entire process where we're dragging in our characters and creating the font. Okay. And then finally, you can do the exact same thing for your bold characters if you want. You can copy them, drag them down by holding Alt and clicking and dragging. And you can duplicate those. Then you'll do the exact same thing. So you go Object Transform Shear. Okay, we'll put in 25 degrees. I'll hit OK. And now you've got your bold italic font as well. So then you'll just upload that into the Fontself Maker dashboard here, and then you'll create your bold italic font as well. So I hope this has been useful for you and you feel confident to design your own fonts. In a future lesson, I'm going to show you how to start lettering your comic in InDesign.